The mechanic who defied the impossible. The smell of burnt oil permeated his clothes when Henry arrived home that night in 1896. His wife, Clara, waited with cold dinner on the table, again. "You need to stop this madness," she whispered, watching him wash the grease from his hands. "The neighbors are talking. They say you're wasting our savings on a dream." Henry dried his hands slowly. In the shed behind their modest Detroit home, his quadricycle sat half-assembled. A car without horses? The idea that made everyone laugh. "Clara," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "What if they're wrong? What if I'm right?" She sighed. It was the same conversation they'd had for months. At Edison Illuminating Company, where Henry worked as chief engineer, his colleagues mocked him daily. "Ford thinks he's smarter than centuries of transportation," they'd joke during lunch breaks. "Next, he'll want to make pigs fly." But Henry had something they didn't. A thought that burned in his mind like a furnace flame. "They think it can't be done. I think it can. That's the only difference between us." One particularly brutal day, his prototype exploded again. The shed caught fire. Neighbors rushed with buckets of water, while Henry stood there, face blackened with soot, watching months of work turn to smoke. "Maybe it's a sign," Clara said gently that night, tending to his burnt hands. "Maybe it's time to accept—" "No." The word came out harder than he intended. "Every failure teaches me something. Every explosion shows me what doesn't work. I'm not failing, Clara. I'm eliminating possibilities." His father visited the next week. The old farmer looked at the charred shed, shook his head. "I raised you to work the land, son. Honest work, not these fantasies." "What if farming isn't my purpose, Father?" "Purpose?" his father scoffed. "Your purpose is to provide for your family, not chase impossible dreams." That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He thought about quitting. The pressure was crushing. The debts were mounting. Everyone he loved wanted him to stop. But then he remembered something. Every great invention was impossible until someone made it possible. The printing press, the telegraph, the light bulb, all impossible until they weren't. At 2 a.m., he slipped out to the shed. By lamplight, he sketched new designs. His hands moved with certainty his mind didn't yet possess. "If I think I can't, I've already lost," he muttered to himself. "But if I think I can—" 6 months later, on June 4th, 1896, something extraordinary happened. The quadricycle sputtered to life. Henry's heart pounded as the engine roared. Clara rushed out, still in her nightgown. "Henry, the neighbors!" But Henry was already climbing aboard his creation. The machine lurched forward. It moved. The car without horses was moving. Clara's complaints turned to gasps. Neighbors emerged from their homes, witnessing the impossible becoming possible. Henry Ford drove around the block, tears streaming down his face, not from the wind, from vindication. But this was just the beginning. Banks refused to fund him. Toys for the rich, they called his invention. Common people will never afford such things. Investors laughed him out of offices. Horses have worked for thousands of years. Why change now? His first company failed, then his second. Each failure hurt, each no stung, each mockery cut deep. But Henry had discovered something profound. The difference between those who achieve the impossible and those who don't isn't talent. It's not luck. It's not even resources. It's thought. Millionaires think they can, he'd tell Clara during their darkest moments. That's why they do. She'd grown to believe him. She'd seen him transform thought into reality in their shed. Years passed, rejections accumulated, but so did knowledge, so did connections, so did possibilities. Then came the Model T, the car that changed everything. Not because it was the best car, but because Henry thought differently than everyone else. While others built cars for the wealthy, Henry thought, what if everyone could afford one? They said it was impossible. Mass production would never work. The costs were too high, the logistics too complex. Henry smiled. He'd heard impossible before. He created the assembly line, cut production time from 12 hours to 90 minutes, dropped the price from $850 to $260. Suddenly, the impossible wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. By 1918, half of all cars in America were Model T. The mechanic who everyone mocked had revolutionized human transportation. But here's what most people don't understand about Henry Ford's story. It wasn't about the car. It was about the thought that preceded the car. Every night in that shed, covered in grease and doubt, Henry made a choice. He chose to think he could. Not hope, not wish, not dream. Think. With the certainty of someone who knows the sun will rise tomorrow. That's the difference between those who change the world and those who watch it change. One group thinks they can't, so they don't. The other group thinks they can, so they do. Years later, a young reporter asked Henry Ford for the secret to his success. Henry leaned back in his chair, remembering that shed, those nights, those doubts. "Young man," he said, "whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right." The reporter looked confused. That's it? That's everything. Because Henry Ford understood what most never grasp. Your thoughts aren't just ideas floating in your head. They're blueprints. They're prophecies. They're commands to the universe. Every millionaire, every world changer, every person who's ever done the impossible started with the same tool, a thought. I think I can. Not because they had proof, not because they had permission, not because they had guarantees, but because they understood the fundamental law of achievement. Your reality follows your thoughts, always. Henry Ford didn't just build cars. He proved that when you change your thoughts, you change your world. And that's not inspiration. That's instruction. The lesson you can apply today. Henry Ford's story reveals a practical truth that you can implement immediately in your own life. Your current circumstances are the result of your past thoughts. Your future circumstances will be the result of your current thoughts. Here's how to apply this. 1. Audit your thoughts. For the next 24 hours, notice every time you think, "I can't." Write it down. You'll be shocked how often you're programming yourself for failure without realizing it. 2. Replace, don't suppress. When you catch yourself thinking, "I can't," don't just try to stop. Replace it with, "How could I?" This shifts your brain from closed to creative mode. 3. Act on your can thoughts. Thinking you can is step 1. Step 2 is taking one small action that aligns with that thought. Today, not tomorrow, today. Remember, Henry Ford didn't build the Model T the day after he thought he could. He built it after thousands of days of thinking he could and acting on that thought. The difference between where you are and where you want to be isn't resources, connections, or luck. It's the gap between thinking you can't and thinking you can. Which thought will you choose today? Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to change your thoughts and change your life. Every week, I share stories and strategies of those who thought they could and did. Comment below. What's one impossible thing you're going to start thinking you can do? Your comment might inspire someone else to change their thoughts too. Share this with that friend who needs to remember they can. Sometimes all we need is someone who believes in our horseless carriages. Because millionaires aren't born, they think they can, and then they become.
See if you've made it this far and are ready to prosper. Click on one of the stories appearing on your screen. Each story is a compass guiding you toward true financial prosperity. See you there.